Okay. The Herald of Coming Good. First appeal to modern First appeal to contemporary humanity by Gurdjieff. Paris, 1933. Okay. Contrary to the established custom, I shall not only permit this first book of mine, as well as the books of the first series, to be reprinted in any country, but, if necessary, I'm willing to subsidize it on the condition, of course, that absolute accuracy is preserved. G. Gurdjieff. Okay, scroll. All right. Inspired as I am by a deep conviction springing from a long line of experimental elucidations and deductions pointing to the conclusion that if a man desires sincerely and seriously, and out of no mere curiosity, to attain the knowledge of the way leading to real being, and if he fulfills to his end all that is requested of him, and begins, in fact, among other things, to aid indirectly, and from his very first step, the attainment of this by others, he will by this act alone become, as it were, the forming ground for the real data contributing to the manifestation of objective and actual good. And animated as I am by the general intention of arriving finally, by the means of my literary arguments and public demonstration proposed for the near future of experimental elucidations, at the instilling into the consciousness of my contemporaries of several such psychic initiative factors, as in my opinion, as well as that of every man capable of a little impartial meditation, ought inevitably to act as a guiding principle in the consciousness of all creatures presuming to call themselves godlike, of such innative factors, namely, I should certainly include the factors including men both to react instinctively and upon reflection to realize clearly the moral obligation to help one's neighbor, as I have now decided upon the very act of selling and of spreading far and wide the contents of this first of my writings, intended to be head the list of my publications and directed by the fulfillment of the task originally imposed upon myself, to initiate itself in man's consciousness the formation of the aforesaid and for the continual life of people important psychic factor. Accordingly, as I have the intention, on the one hand, affording to a multitude of our common father's creatures who bear your likeness, but whose means are for some reason or other limited, the possibility of acquiring this first booklet of mine free of charge, and I have, on the other hand, certain definite plans bearing upon the next publication of my writings, I've deliberately decided not to fix any definite price for this booklet, leaving it to the free will of the purchaser to pay from 8 to 108 French francs. I shall at the same time, and without entering into the usual contemporary discussions about life, expressly request all those who happen to acquire this first booklet of mine to answer 3 questions will be set to them by the seller, as to permit him to fill in the corresponding paragraphs of the registration blank herewith appended. The author. Registration blank. Appended to the Herald of Coming Good. Number 1. First, name of purchaser. Second, address. Third, acquired accidentally or on advice. Fourth, who advised. Give name and address. 5. Sum paid. Signature of seller. My first practical counsel. I counsel all readers who've had at any time met me upon the ground of my ideas to postpone reading this first appeal until they have, concentrating in their nature as well as their thoughts and feelings, grasped the essence of the content of the circular letter appended to the booklet, and I have all at the same time previously acquainted themselves with the registration blank attached to this letter, and which will be of practical import for acquiring the books of my first series of writing, G. Gurdjieff. So I'm going to now skip to the circular letter. All right, circular letter. Addressed to all who have any time met me on the grounds of my ideas, with 7 appended registration blanks. Dear Sir or Madame, when looking through today the final and printed text of the first book of my writings as it was brought from the printer, and which I have called The Herald of Coming Good, my thoughts began to swarm like thoroughbred bees disturbed in their narrow primitive hive with all sorts of impressions which have been accumulating in the course of my past life, amongst them remembrance of definitely elucidated consequences in certain cases, whose exterior results were like those which, in my opinion, ought to arise in man's lives through the publication of this book of mine. While reflecting upon this, as well as upon everything else connected with the ensuing publications of my writings, it occurred to me that before allowing this, which may be called my firstborn on earth, to make its initial step amongst the masses of people unacquainted with me, I should first send it, armed with my circular letter, to each of those people. Granted, of course, I was still able to discover their addresses widely scattered all over the earth, who have ever come into contact with me on the ground of my ideas, and who later deviated from me in the sense of subjective relations toward me as to a personality, no matter whether as friends or as enemies. I decided to do this first because this first child of mine, forming as it does but a part of a very important general result, consequence upon my 8-year night and day, almost uninterrupted, concentrated and unusual for the contemporary man, active work, lacked still, being yet isolated and into the bargain, sufficient strength to defend itself against all kinds of snares and misfortunes. The means of defending itself primarily against that of late increased among us, types of people who, through resembling us in outward formation, have yet become in their responsible age as a result of their abnormal education in childhood, as well as, of course, their degenerate hereditary. The possessors of the nature and heredity of real and rapacious ravens, sending off this firstborn of mine with the prayer of accompanying letter to shield it from the aforesaid ravens, I desire already now, in gratitude for the fulfillment of my request, and without waiting for the time to become ripe for this, as it necessarily will, to warn all those who have ever met me, or have discussed my ideas with me, about one condition, as yet unexplained in this booklet, contained in my proposed plan for the spreading far and wide of my writings, which is my intention also to publish in the near future. According to this condition for acquiring of my writings, in spite of what's been said in the text of the booklet herewith appended, as to the categorical decision to make accessible only the first book of the first series, the books of the second series, as well as the first book of the third series, may also be made as accessible. The fact that all the books of the second series will be immediately sent or distributed as soon as printed to anyone desiring them, irrespective of whether he has already been a follower of mine or has now only become one, to anyone whose address will be indicated on the 7 registration blanks appended to this letter, the filling in and posting of which blanks to the corresponding center of spreading of my writings will be imposed as an obligatory duty upon the person who will distribute or sell my first 3 books of the first 3 of the first series of my writings. I think now it would be most useful for my fundamental aim, as well as for the easy and certain understanding of all I have said in this circular letter of mine, if in the first place I frankly confess the objective truth on the basis of which I decided with a clear conscience to make use of such an unusual device for the spreading of far and wide of my writings. And secondly, reminding all the honorable addressees of my circular letter of one very actual and easily imaginable fact which played a part in my past life during the period of my meetings and discussion with them on the ground of my ideas. Where the first is concerned, I had in mind that commandment already sanctified by the ages for the peaceful and happy existence of communities, and which is thus expressed in the words, one hand washes another. But the last mentioned fact resulted from and consists in that if I, the person, that is, whose common sense, broad understanding, presence of mind, and commercial capacities have been briefly but satisfactorily touched upon the first book of the second series of my writings, lack at the present enough money for the publication with a view to human happiness of my almost 10 years' labor as a writer, a labor which is the result of a half century of deliberate suffering and conscious labors for the realization of what was, after all, sided active reflection, predetermined by me, money necessarily to avoid depending upon the caprices of various professionals and non-professional publishers, then that is due exclusively to the fact that when I, your formerly humble servant, had the opportunity of saving up for such an essential aim, this really contemptible money, which is for contemporary people, the source of most evil, I gave all my time up to you. And you, thanks only to do this, if you do not possess, chiefly because of your criminal laziness, and also because I confess, now meeting you then as I did, I was inwardly pursuing altogether a different aim, that which you ought to have, and which, when I then satisfied, with complete honesty on my side, your curiosity, and sometimes even perhaps your love of knowledge, you've acquired imperceptibly from yourself, and have now in your individuality, first of all, the necessary feeling of self-evaluation, which gives you the possibility of feeling yourself superior to the average man. And secondly, you have in your preliminary required data for entering, with the help of my detailed and written explanations, indications upon the path leading to real being. I think I have the right to ask from you still more, namely, that you, as people more or less familiar with my language and the form it takes by my thought, as well as with my first original manner of exposition, should first attempt yourselves, without any of that philosophizing common and contemporary people, to understand the various axioms illuminated by me in these first books, and which in their interrelation form the very essence of the whole of this series of my impartial writings, and then should be devote the whole of yourself for a different period to aiding by your explanations the understanding of them by other than the sons of our common Father, who have strayed like you, and who lack as a result, as you in your inner world, all perseverance in regard to objective truths of whatever nature. As I was obliged to address this first circular letter primarily to people who already come into direct relation to me, I should like to profit by this opportunity and to express in conclusion, in the name of future generations, as well as the personally my sincerest gratitude to those of the people coming into contact with me during the 20-year period of life mentioned in the Herald of the Coming Good have, through many years without their knowledge, served me as objects for my observations and investigations, the process going on in them of crystallization and decrystallization of the psychic factors, the transformation of which for the acquiring of subjective manifestation demands a comparatively lengthy period. I considered it my moral duty to add here that the last observations and investigations of mine in the past cannot henceforth serve as the reason why these people who have served as the object of my investigation should now have lost the possibility of entering together with others upon the true path and of attaining, by the help of my detailed and written explanations, to real being. For the automatic elimination from the general entity of the above-mentioned people of all psychic factors capable of appending the wholehearted devotion of the self to nearly based work for the attainment of the predetermined higher being, which must necessarily be kin to man, and for the elimination likewise of some resulting and so-called bitter dregs in relation to me as a personality, I think it's necessary only to say the following. Believe me, during the whole period of my relationship with you, my inner world never harbored another egotistical or altruistic impulses, and they existed only, always in everything, the exclusive desire to prepare in all perfection for the future generations the science of the objective truth of reality. But in any case, that firstly the whole account realized by the sale of the books of my first series of writings will be carried into a special fund reserved for printing. The spreading of these writings among the masses and giving of facilities of those unable to acquire them. And secondly, all detailed inquiries as to the all-embracing literature created by me during these years will be answered, for the time being, only from the Central Bureau of my publications, whose address is Chateau Pardot, Fontainebleau, France. Fontainebleau, France. At the moment, the first book of the first series is already being set up and printed in Russian, French, English, and German. Colloquial languages. Translations are already being finished in Armenian, Spanish, Turkish, and Swedish languages. So far, the books of the first series are being printed only in France. In the near future, it's proposed to begin printing in Germany, America, and Persia. For the retail sale of the first edition of the books of the first series, I fixed the price, irrespective of the place of sale, at 200 French francs. G. Gurdjieff. Okay. A supplementary announcements evoked by the events of the last few days and which might have very great significance for many people who have known me. Tuesday, 7th March 1933, Grand Café Fontainebleau, France. The events of an economical, political, and social character taking place in the last few weeks amongst the people of all the continents have finally confirmed me the conviction that already the small booklets of my writing, which head the list of my publications, will have an unusually large and moreover a rapidly increased circulation, and will fall, of course, first of all, into the hands of each of those people who 11 years ago took part in one way or another in the organization in France of the principal department of the public institute founded by me under the name of the Institute for Man's Harmonious Development, and in view of the fact that shortly in the very spot and in almost the same conditions, there is due to take place a very important event connected with that former organization, I decide today, that is, a few hours before the appearance of this book in print, when I was sketching the plans for my proposed new constructions, to write the following announcement and to ask the publisher to add this supplement. The imminent event, information about which will, without doubt, call up in feelings and thought of those who formerly participated in my past activity, various associations and reactions consist of that. Firstly, on the 23rd of April, by the old style of the real year, that is on the day of St. George the Victor, which day was counted throughout the period of existence of the Institute as, so to speak, its coronation day, there is due to take place, and also happened for the first time in 11 years ago, a solemn laying of the foundation stone of the new building, which already in its first form was an account of its significance, considered and ought henceforth all the more to be considered as it were at the heart of my activity, for the good of my neighbours, and which was known to all who ever visited the Chateau de Pierre, under the name Gymnasium, or as it was called by the English and the Romanians, study house. This time, the final building, answering as it does in every respect to its appellation, will be situated in the very center of the big park. The new gymnasium or study house will comprise, beside the theatre and lecture hall, which already exist on the first and basement floor, several independent laboratories, fitted out according to the achievements of modern science, and the number of which will be found 3 as yet unexistent on Earth. Okay, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to continue in the next video.